I'm going to show you how to build a React application with create, update, delete, and fetching of data from the server side. We will be using the TanStack Query version 5. Version 5 is the latest version at the time of this recording. We will also be using React Router or Router, depending on which side of the pond you're from, to navigate between pages. We are, of course, using Vite as the dev server and file bundler in our development environment. And we will be using JSON Server to simulate the backend. I'm going to demonstrate the completed app side by side with the simulated database or database, depending on what side of the pond you're from. And I will show you how to set all of this up. So in this world, all songs are written and performed by Taylor Swift, hence the Taylor Swift apocalypse. So I've seeded the database with 3 songs and albums. So right off the bat, it's doing a successful fetching of the data. Let's take a look at the network tab. Okay, it's going out and fetching our songs with a 200. This icon here is the TanStack React Query developer tool. And I'm going to show you how to install and set this up as well. It's wonderful. So let's demonstrate the post request. Let's do a test song, a test album. Okay, it's doing the post request. You can see there. Let's do a view of let's go fetch a single song. So if I click on that hyperlink, it'll take me to a single song. Here you can see the song ID. And this ID is generated by a plugin, npm plugin or npm package call UUID, which you're very familiar with. Using the React router to go back to the main view. And then if I wish to edit it, or update it, okay, update it, submit. As you can see, there's been updated. So that's our put request. Now let's do a delete. It's deleted and it's fetching the data from the database again. So who is my intended audience for this video? I would love to say everyone, but as you know, I cannot make everybody happy all the time. Ideally, you have familiarity with JavaScript, of course, the React library, and the React Router library, which is pretty important in this app. You just need to know the basic of how React Router works. You do not need to know TanStack React Query. I will help you with that. So if you're trying to update from version 3 or version 4 to version 5, I will help you with that. If you're absolutely brand new to React Query and you've been using useEffect all this time, I will help you with that. I've created a GitHub starter branch for this tutorial with the bare bones photo structure and the completed backend. I also have the completed version of the app in the main branch. Just give you an idea how popular React Query is. In the last 7 days, there have been 2.5 million downloads. And of course, like I said before, we're up to version 5 now, but the last version, the last subversion of version 4 had over 700,000 downloads in 1 week. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of people looking to upgrade to version 5 here soon. If you were to pull down my starter app from GitHub for this tutorial, make sure you run npm install to install all of the npm packages. Let me explain the simulated backend. I'm using JSON Server, as I mentioned before, and I've created a db.json file to simulate the database. And here I have some seed data with 3 songs. Now, my JSON server is working with another npm package called concurrently. So what concurrently allows me to do is to run the JSON server simulated database along with the Vite dev server. So the command server, if you run npm run server in the terminal, it will run the Vite dev server along with the JSON server. Okay, so now I have the front end up and running along with the back end. And if you look at the database script here, I'm watching for changes on the um, on the um, on the database itself. If there's any changes, it'll update by itself, and then you can go to localhost port 3000 to look at the data. And of course, you would have to go to this endpoint here, which is called songs, the songs endpoint. If you notice here on line 22, I've also installed the ESLint um, query plugin for TanStack, and of course the DevTools. I'll show you how to set up in a bit, but in terms of the ESLint for TanStack, in the ESLint RC file, you notice here I've changed the format to .json. I like this format because, as developers, we're used to that format. According to documentation, you need to add this line to the extends array. Okay, if you are using Prettier, make sure that Prettier is always the last element inside of this extends array. Okay, and one more thing I want to note. Well, 2 more things actually. Axios, I'm using Axios. Axios is superior to native JavaScript fetch. It has better error handling, among other things, as well as other options that native fetch don't have, including an interceptor. Okay, and this package, Axios, is an industry standard. It gets about 3 million downloads every week on npm. And then, of course, the router or the router, because we're switching views, so we can need that router in there. So let's take a look at the front end folder structure for this app. But before we do that, if you're not a subscriber to my channel, please consider subscribing. It's completely free and it'll help me grow the channel. Thank you so much. Okay, so the thing that I want to note is I have a directory here called pages, and the files in the pages folder have the JSX extension, which means they're a component. Yes, they're component, but they're React router components or router components. So they're not reusable. They're components for the React router, like I said. So therefore, they're not reusable. So it will make better sense to have it outside of the component directory, which is in following the pattern that was established by Next.js. And then I have a custom hook directory. Now, even if you're not using React Query or TanStack Query, it's a better practice to separate out or abstract out your use effect, just for sanity purposes, so that your component don't get too bloated and for testing purposes later on. And then I have a services directory where I have a songs.api file to make interaction with the backend. So let's start with interaction with the backend API. In the services directory, in the songs API.js file, I have just very basic fetching stuff. Fetching all the songs, fetching a song and passing in the ID. Very standard JavaScript, nothing groundbreaking here. You want to pause the video to type that down, or you can just copy and paste from my repo in the main branch. Update, delete, very standard stuff. Okay. Now, I did mention that you should be using Axios. Okay. If your company prefer to do things the hard way, feel free to use fetch. But if you prefer to do things the easy way using Axios, go ahead and copy my code here. Okay, I'm using both fetch and Axios so that you have a reference in case you want to do things the hard way and the unsafe way. But I'm leaving this in here so that you can have options. Let's go to Main.jsx file. Now we are starting to get into the heart of TanStack React Query. So aside from the normal React importation, I have the standard browser router pattern here where I am importing the browser router module from React Router and then wrapping my app with it so that I can use it to route to the different views, right? But from TanStack React Query, I want the query client, query client provider, and of course the DevTools. And then I want to create a constant, query client constant, and invoke the query client constructor like this. The query client constructor will take as an option this default options object here. Now my goal for this video isn't to go through every single minutia of the TanStack Query library. I will refer you to the documentation for that. My goal is to get you up and running quickly if you're upgrading from version 4 to version 5 or even from version 3 to version 5. Or if you're brand new to React Query, to whet your appetite and get you up and running with full CRUD operations quickly. If I go through every single minutia, that video will last like an hour and a half. The first component that I want to work on is the song form component, which is this part of the application. It has two input fields, the song and the album. So in code, this is what the song form component looks like. It takes two props, onSubmit and initial value. The initial value is of course the song and album, and that is going to be to empty string if there's nothing else coming from the API. And then I have a dynamic function to create two input dynamically. Well, in this case, two input, and that is the song and album. Okay, and then I have this handle change input function that will be fired when the input gets changed. And of course, I have a handle submit function that will handle form submit. Just very standard React stuff. And then this component will be used in the add song component and the edit song component for the React router. Now let's open up add song component and work on our first mutation together. So let's import the use mutation and the use query client module from TanStack. We're going to need UID for this, and we're going to import create song from the API interaction because we will be using this function. And of course, we are going to use the, for lack of a better term, the static component that we created previously, and we will pass data down to it. In TanStack Query, anytime that we mutate data, we need to use the useQuery hook from TanStack. Okay, and the common pattern is to declare a constant called QueryClient, and then we're going to use the QueryClient inside of a function to mutate. So I'm going to declare a function called createSongMutation. For now, it's just a shell function. And this function will use another hook called useMutation, which I imported up here. And then inside of useMutation, the typical pattern is that we're going to have a mutation function. Okay. Now you can write an async function here, but if you recall, in our songs API, we already have a create song. Here you can see I'm using fetch, which is commented out, and I'm using Axios, which I prefer. Okay, so, and it's an async function, right? So you can either declare that in a separate file or you can declare it here. The cleaner pattern is to declare it in a separate file. So create song will be our mutation function, and then one of the other option is on success. Now there are, as you can see here with my IntelliSense, it gives me multiple option, right? But the typical pattern is to use on success, and then we pass in a callback function. So our query client constant is storing the use query client hook from TanStack. And so inside of the onSuccess callback function, we will use a function from this hook called invalidate queries, like so. So let me explain the concept of this invalidate queries function. That's also an invalidate query singular function as well. In this case, I'm using the plural form. So TanStack fetch and caches data for us. Now, if the data, if the data in our app changes over time, then it becomes stale and invalid. So therefore, TanStack will go out and fetch new data for us and cache it if necessary. And it does that in reaction to data changes and state changes in our application. Now, if we need fine-grained control over the stale time, we can set the stale time. Otherwise, TanStack Query will manage that for us. Now, if you look at the signature of this function, it takes the query key and then an array data structure and then some options, right? So the query key has to be in this form here, in that form, that verbiage. And then the value for this key will be in the shape of an array data structure with a serializable string. The reason why you need an array is because you can pass multiple key in here, multiple values in here. So what the heck is a query key? In our case, it's called songs. Well, think of it as a constant for the data in our app. Okay, and is used React Query or TanStack React Query is using that constant as a reference to our data so that it can make updates and changes and cache it if necessary. So that's pretty much it as to what a query key is. Let's go ahead and console out success if we are able to successfully create new songs. And I need another function in here, and let me just paste it in because we were getting low on time, and I'll explain what it is. So we need a way to fire off this function, right? And so that's going to be our event handler. And if you recall, the song form component, one of its props is this onSubmit function, right? And so I'm creating this handler, passing in the song, okay? And then I'm going to call this mutation function here, and it has a mutate function on this hook, and then it passes in the UUID, which I'm creating. I'm creating that long ID for each particular song, and then I'm spreading out the song. Basic React stuff. The only thing different here is this function call here for the mutation. So just a quick note. This mutation, this create song mutation function here, this can be abstracted out into a custom hook. For example, it could be a custom hook inside of the mutation file and then import it to keep this component clean. I'll demonstrate it later on. So we're past the 20-minute mark, so I'll be flying through this tutorial for the rest of the time. The next component I want to work on next is a React router component, which you can access by clicking on the individual songs, and then it'll take you to a song, one song singular. And you need the ID for that. And you can see here, you can pass in the ID in the params. That's why it lives in the pages directory, and that's why I need the React router. In the song component, I went ahead and set up the scaffolding for React router, and I've imported the appropriate modules to use, and I set up a navigation constant. I pull out the ID from use params, and in the JSX, I set up the navigation, and the song. Now this is forthcoming. This data hit song. This will be coming from TanStack fetching. So let's paste in the scaffolding code here. So up here, I've imported the useQuery hook from TanStack. And from this hook, I can destructure out its pending, its error, data, and error. Now, if I've alias data with hit song to make it easier to reason about. Now, if you're coming from an older version of TanStack Query, this used to be called is loading. Now it's called it's pending. So the pattern for useQuery hook is similar to use mutation. I still need to pass in an object, right? I still need a query key, and the value for the query key still needs to be in the form of an array. I passed in the songs constant so that TanStack can keep track of the data in the app. And I need to pass in the ID, which I extrapolated up here, because I'm putting out a single song with an ID, right? So that's information that TanStack needs to keep track of. And I need a query function. I'm going to pass in a callback here, fetch songs, which we declare in the songs API. And I need to pass in the ID up here. Okay? And so now I have access to hit song, the songs in hit song. If you're astute, you know why I call this hit song, so that we don't have a song situation, right? Let's work on the editing feature next, where you edit a single song. It's very similar to the song component that we worked on recently. So you click on the edit button, it'll fetch a single song with an ID, and then from here in the two fields we can edit this, submit, and you can see the changes there. Conceptually, what we are doing in edit a single song, is very similar to what we did previously in song, in that we are still bringing out a single song with an ID. So therefore, we still need to use the query, the use query, and then we still need all of the React router stuff. But what's different here is that we are going to update the song and or the album. So therefore, we need to import in the use mutation hook from the library, and we need to pull in the function, the update song function from the songs API. And so let me just paste in the skeleton function. Anytime that we mutate something, we need to bring in useQueryClient, and we store that hook in this constant here, QueryClient. So inside of this use mutation function, it takes an object, and inside the object, we need a mutation function. And that mutation function is just that update song that we declare in the songs API. Again, we can, if we wanted to, we can abstract out these queries and mutation into its own custom hook, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit later. And then we're going to need an onSuccess callback function. And then I've already went over the invalidate queries concept, and we're going to be using sort of the same concept here. So we're going to call QueryClient, we're going to use the invalidate queries function on the hook, and we're going to pass in the query key of songs that we're going to mutate in the form of an array. And then once that's done, we're going to navigate to the root directory. Okay, and then all the error checking and is pending state changes. We need to communicate that to the end user if they're on slow Wi-Fi. What we need now is another function to fire off this updated song mutation function in the event handler. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that in there. It's going to be very simple. We can the submit handler will take an updated song, and then we're going to fire off the function called mutate on it, which is the function that's provided inside the hook. Pass it to ID, of course, right? That's why we extrapolated the ID up here, and then spread out the updated song. Okay, and that's pretty much it for the logic. Now we just need to return some JSX, and the JSX that we're going to be returning is the static component that we created earlier, song form. Okay, and then again, the song form takes in one of the props it takes in is the onSubmit handler, and then we pass in the submit handler, and that's pretty much it for this component. Before we work on our final React router component, let's work on creating custom hook for mutations and queries. I've been teasing that for a while, so let's go ahead and take care of that. So as you can see here, I've created a custom hook directory. In there, I have a mutation.js file and a queries.js file to separate out the mutations from the queries. And so in the final mutations, I imported the use mutation hook and the use query client hooks, just like we did before from the library. And I need the delete function from the songs API. Just as a reminder, this is what that function looks like. And then I need to export a function called use delete song, which is the name of our custom hook. And just like before, I need to store this use query client hook inside of the query client constant, and then we are going to return use mutation hook that we imported up on top, It's a function call, and then we pass in an object as its first argument. We declare a mutation function, which, as you guess it, would be delete song. And then we need an onSuccess callback. And then inside of the onSuccess callback, just like we did before, we're going to call QueryClient, and we're going to call the invalidate queries function. We know what the signature is already. It will be query key, which again is songs. And then if it successfully deleted a song, then we will console log song deleted with a party emoji. I tried to find a Taylor Swift emoji but couldn't find one. So, and then let's go to the query one. This is going to be mind-numbingly boring for you, so I'll just go ahead and paste it in so that we can save some time, because we've done this enough times already. The same pattern as before. If you noticed earlier, I had a typo in the file name here. It's supposed to be song list, not song list. I fixed it, and then I also done the scaffolding for this file. I brought in the use navigate hook for React Router, and then I brought in this child component so that we can add songs and album for this component, because there's a component again that we can do all the things. And I brought in the two custom hook for mutation and queries that we just built. And so let's go ahead and immediately bring in our two custom hooks for React Query. And so for the query, I brought in the user suspect is pending, is error, data, which I've abstracted out to songs to make a little bit more sense, and then of course the error. And then let's go ahead and bring in the use delete song, and we will assign it to a constant called delete song mutation, and then we can use this constant in an event handler later. Okay, so now that we brought in those two custom hooks, let's go ahead and handle error and latency should that occur. Okay, just a very simple message. And let's now create a function to use the delete song mutation. It's just very straight up React JavaScript stuff. The only difference here is that we are using the delete song mutation. We're calling the mutate function in the hook. Okay, and then we're passing the ID. Obviously, we need to know the ID to delete the correct song, right? So now all we need to do in the JSX is to map through songs, which is coming back from the API, and then render it out. So the first thing we're going to do in the JSX is to add the add song component. And let me just remind you what that is. It is this part right here. Okay. And then we are going to run a basic JavaScript mapping function to get out all the songs and album and these functionality buttons. All right. So it's just a basic map function through the API data. So it's not really that complicated at all. And let me see here. And this event handler here, this handle delete, is going to be invoked here. right? It's going to be invoked here on click when they press on the delete button here. Okay. And of course, you have your edit button here, and then um, the the router here is when they click on the header, like the name of the song, to go to the individual song view. Okay, so that's the end of our components. Now the App.jsx, it's still empty. So we need to fix that. We need to add code to that. So what we need here is, of course, um, the React router, because we're going to, from here is where we declare all of our routes. Um, and then in terms of the local files, we need the components that has a relationship is attached to React router. Okay, so we need to import those React router components as local files. Okay, now um, now just uh, if you're familiar with if you're familiar with uh, React router and how that works, um, this is a piece of cake. Okay, the base route, of course, is song list, which I just show you, and then um, for the individual songs, we go to the route with the ID, and of course, to edit the song, we go to the song with the ID, and of course, the edit route. Very basic routing. If you need help with React Router, let me know in the comments. I'll try my best to help you. Every version of React Router, it is breaking changes. It's like a new library for every version. But uh, but every version is getting better and better. So there's breaking changes because they keep on improving the product. The same thing with TanStack Query. The reason why there's so many changes is because they're actually making it better, and when they make it better, wholesale, there's going to be breaking APIs. So just something we have to deal with as developers. Okay, so that's it. Let's go do some testing. Okay, so I got the app running um, by running the command npm run server, which once again is to run both the front end and the back end. Let's take a look at our database. So we have our seed data there, as you can see in the UI as well as in the database. Let's make sure this link works, right? Here's album. By the way, this color, I know from a very reliable source that this is Taylor Swift's favorite color. Anyhow, uh, let's add a new song and album. Let's go. Let's just say test album. Okay. Okay. There's our data. Okay, great. Edit 111. Submit. There's a result. Okay. That's okay. Delete. Gone. Okay. Let's also make sure that this. Yeah. Okay. So this wonderful React query tool. I keep on saying React Query. It's actually called TanStack React Query, but I'm so used to calling it React Query that slip of the tongue. Spend some time uh, reading up on this tool. It's really good. It's really wonderful. Um, Let me see here. Okay, so this piece of documentation here, if you're updating, just an FYI, the documentation is extensive, and that's a double-edged sword. That's why I'm making this video, because going through here is like watching paint dry. But um, so the red functions are old functions, and the green ones are what you're supposed to replace them with. Okay. Also have a look at the guide. So this is your friend, but like I said before, it's that's a lot there. Okay, but it's a great piece of kit. All right, my friends, thank you for watching. Thank you for bearing with me. If you like this, please consider subscribing. You know, people that needs help with React Query, refer them to my video. See you next time.